Hello Internet and welcome to the Collective Arcana. We are a channel all about tabletop gaming. My name is Wyatt and today we're going to talk about GMPCs, what they are, and when or if you should use them. Hey, if you like this kind of content, don't forget to like and subscribe. It lets us know what you want to see and it really helps the channel out. Thanks. Today's video is sponsored by Dungeons & Lasers 4 Encounters from Archon Studios. Now, here at the Collective Arcana, we have mentioned several times how big a fan we are of this terrain company, but now is your chance to find out for yourself and get involved. Head over to Gamefound at the link below, and you can sign up. Anyone who signs up early will get a free Leshy as part of their pledge. Where previous Dungeons & Lasers campaigns have focused on their modular dungeon tiles, this time they are taking things outside the dungeon. 3 encounter sets are planned: the Elven Woods, the Swamps of Doom, and the Land of Giants, featuring different types of terrain to immerse your players. Each has an optional themed add-on printed map with a grid to place your terrain on and complete your encounter. And there's even a creature pack with 32 classic monsters, including a huge wyvern, a manticore, giant bugs and creatures, just to name a few. Backers who pledge at the starter pledge or above will get a massive Tarrasque miniature, 7.5 inches high, almost about a foot, maybe over a foot long. It's huge. The campaign starts June 14th and runs until June 28th. So follow now, sign up early, get that Leshy, and make sure you get all this awesome, wonderful terrain and these minis. So firstly, what is a GMPC? Well, a GMPC is exactly what it sounds like. It's a player character controlled by the GM. Now, the GM controls a lot of NPCs, and sometimes they will have class features or otherwise be comparable to player characters, but they're still NPCs. So what is the difference in what makes something a GM NPC, or a GMPC rather? Honestly, it's sort of an amorphous thing. For different folks, it's different things, and the line between NPC and GMPC can be very blurry. For me, at its core, the GMPC is different for one main reason: narrative focus. All right? Anytime that is happening, anytime a PC or an NPC is getting more focus on the players or is removing their agency, that's probably a GMPC. Now, there are certainly NPCs that can be focal for scenes or, big and important to the plot. These are typically going to be recurring allies or villains. But again, the core here is that they are present constantly and are driving the plot instead of the players. Regularly is really the key word here. You can have a powerful NPC that shows up and helps the party out or helps them solve a problem but when they are there for more than one adventure, when they are constantly able to be relied upon to solve problems for the party that the party cannot solve otherwise or would have great difficulty solving on their own, that's the problem. But sometimes it's fine, have that NPC show up and help, or have the players owe them a favor or have to work out an alternative reason for why they're helping them. The key is to make sure that you have a reason why that powerful NPC isn't going to always be there to bail the party out. What is the limiting factor there? Because look, I hear you. Sometimes an NPC will tag along for an adventure. We've all had players adopt, the lowly kobold that they found on their first adventure who surrendered and was peaceable. But, what's the difference here? The difference is that's a traveling companion NPC that's probably not going to be telling the party where to go or what to do, or if it does, they're probably going to, sort of shrug or laugh it off. Maybe there will be like a loyalty quest sort of thing, if from like Mass Effect or something of that nature, where they're going to ingratiate themselves and solidify that friendship with this little adopted NPC. But again, it's really not driving the plot. It's the players choosing to do that, and this plucky kobold or whatever just going along with it and hoping for the best. The good rule of thumb there is to just set those expectations and set that role for what this NPC is right away so that there's no question. In this way, you want them to, if they're going to drive the plot, you want to set terms ahead of time exactly what they're capable of, what they're going to do plot-wise, and not have too many surprises that aren't, planned. Anytime you're doing something consciously, that's a different thing. But, for example, if an NPC joins the party and says, if you can get me to Mosuzi, I know how to get us past the gate, and I will put you in touch with people who may, offer you other work. Great. As long as that person doesn't also, outshine everyone in combat or anything, that's fine. That's a great NPC that's serving a purpose. It's, going to, and then, maybe intrigue and, stuff arises around them. Maybe they realize early on they don't necessarily trust this NPC, or, maybe things that this NPC suggests might make them think that they're involved in something, an organization that they either want to avoid or be a part of. Lots of plot hooks there. But again, the person driving those plot hooks are the party. They're the ones wondering, what organization are you a member of? How are you going to get us into the gate? Things like that, rather than having this NPC start telling them exactly what they're going to do when they get to the city and who they're going to blah, 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 right? Leave it open-ended, leave room for your players to interact with it, rather than just having this NPC set the entire tone. Maybe it's the reverse. Maybe they hired this NPC, and in that case, it's great to have this NPC, fill gaps that they don't have. Otherwise, why would they hire them? Maybe the party is a more intrigue, social-focused party, and they know that they've got to go, visit another area, and they'll have to go through some pretty rough terrain. Well, maybe they'll hire a guide, somebody who has good survival skill training, knowledgeable about creatures in the area, that sort of thing. But they're not driving the plot. They're not invested in what the players do when they get there, although you could certainly hint at some agreement or disagreement based on what they overhear the party's plans, and you could, by all means, extrapolate that out into its own little showdown or something at some point. But again, that character is not driving the plot. The players are. So while all these NPCs are able to go and meld into the background when their particular relevance is not at the forefront, while the party is discussing plans for later, or their own social role play and things like that, this character can be away and not involved. Versus a GM or a GMPC rather, that is going to have trouble melding into the background. They're going to have their own agenda. They are going to have their own abilities and information that they are constantly putting forth, and they don't mind. They don't need or mind not having the party to achieve those goals. For a standalone NPC, that's very interesting. For someone who's always there, that starts to feel a little rough. The bottom line is, when you have a GMPC, you are limiting your player's ability to interact with your world by having this sort of mediary go-between between them and the world. The last thing you want as a GM, I'm sure most GMs agree, are a lot of scenes where you are talking to yourself in two different voices going back and forth, trying to say, oh, this is blah, blah, well, I disagree with blah, 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 well, I think blah, blah. No one wants that. No one wants to listen to you do that. Players would much rather be arguing with your NPCs themselves rather than watching your NPCs argue with each other. So are there ever times to use a GMPC? Yeah, absolutely. Like any tool in a good GM's toolkit, used responsibly, it's a wonderful feature. Overused, it can become, rote, cumbersome, and ruin everything. Like Obi-Wan Kenobi in the original Star Wars, a wise and powerful character hanging around just long enough to provide information and get everyone heading in the right direction plot-wise is a great thing to do, especially for a table of new players. Or, if it's a new setting, new world, and you want somebody to be able to info dump and guide these players, who are the good guys, who are the bad guys in this world, whether they help the good guys or the bad guys, that's going to be their choice, but this character can sort of, let them know, show them the ropes, sort of. The key to success here is that the GMPC doesn't last long. Whether it is, for whatever reason, they are going to become inaccessible. Dead is a great way to do that, but not the only way to make them inaccessible. If they don't die, if the character does appear again, you can take this as a great opportunity to show the characters how much they've grown. This character that was their guide, was their primary intro to the world, something they depended on and looked up to as, stronger, more experienced than them. Now when they see them again, if they see them again, now they realize, oh, well, we've grown quite a bit. We are on par, maybe even, in some ways stronger, more powerful or whatever than this character that we once relied on so heavily. And that's a great narrative point, and it'd be silly to waste it. but some GMs will insert a GMPC for the long term. And sometimes the GM may feel like they have good reason to do so. And hey, I'm not at that table, and there are certainly scenarios where I can imagine it being beneficial to have a GMPC. But you still want to use it responsibly and sparingly whenever you can. And so for that reason, we're going to talk about some ways that you can avoid a GMPC. If you think that you've got these insurmountable problems and only a GMPC can solve them, we're going to offer some alternatives. Now, the most cited reasons I see, or the most cited good reasons I see for there to be a GMPC is usually going to come around to group size or player dynamics. One, something's missing. Whether that's a rogue to do roguey things or a cleric or whatever to heal, nobody in the party wanted to play something that the GM feels is necessary, either to the mechanics of the way the game works, most games want some sort of healer, or to the type of story that they have all agreed to tell. Every GM has had the scenario of, we're going to do a real intrigue-heavy campaign, and everybody shows up and all of their characters are, the bodyguards. None of them are the person who's supposed to be doing the talking. And that's okay, and in that case, you may feel the need to introduce this NPC, noble person or whatever, to lead this intrigue, and then just sort of send the players off to handle the things that can't be handled with intrigue. It's definitely not what you had in mind, and it's not going to be ideal, but it's something that a lot of folks will do. Another thing that you'll see sometimes is where there's just too small of a group. There's no way to cover all the bases that you need covered, and maybe even there's difficulty balancing a group of 2 or 3 people depending on your game system. So the GM will drop in an NPC ally to help out. That's also fine. Now, both of these are mostly good reasons to have a GMPC, and we'll get to some bad reasons here in a moment, but first let's talk about some alternative solutions if you're not sure that a GMPC is right for you. First of all, before you introduce a GMPC, talk to your players. Let them know why you think one might be needed. Let them know, what purpose it's going to serve, what it's not going to do, so that they don't have so there's no question about, is this a main character driving a plot? No, this is just here to fill your gaps and be ordered around and disappear as need be, whatever it requires. And that's good. As with everything, you want to have that talk up front, that session 0, and discover what everyone's limits are and what you and your GMPC can and cannot do without ruining the fun for everyone. So now let's talk alternatives. If you think the party needs a healer, you may just have one of the players know or be related to somebody who is proficient at producing healing items, potions and things like that, and is willing to give them out at either a steep discount or, so many free every level sort of thing, whatever ends up working within your system. That's a fine solution if the problem is just healing. If the problem is more, in combat healing, making sure that the players can, not just out of combat, but, in combat taking a lot of beating without sacrificing a whole turn healing, you can always introduce magic items, like sort of free action or bonus action, depending on what the terminology is in your game, to just activate this item, get a little bit of healing so that you can keep going in the middle of a fight. Just your table, as long as both of your players have it, it's not broken. It's just allowing you to tell the type of story with lots of fighting and stuff like that you want without having to worry about them being slain every fight just because you wanted to have some action. You could also just bend the rules about what players are capable of. If you don't have any characters who can heal, give out some healing abilities. Either, if you're playing Pathfinder 2nd Edition, give someone free training in medicine and, the battle medicine feat. If you are playing another game, maybe give the wizard access to healing spells that they might not normally be able to get, or have the ranger have access to a lay on hands type abilities, as a gift from some elemental or woodland spirit type creature that they helped out in the past. And you can use both or any of these extra free gifts as narrative options as well. Now we maybe want to dive into, well, what did this ranger do to earn this power? Now, if the party just needs an extra body for combat, instead of any particular role that needs filled, ask yourself if counters can be just adjusted to fit this smaller party. In some games, it's definitely possible. Pathfinder2e has great resources for parties of any size. Even in their published adventures, they have lots of ways that you can adjust an encounter to make sure that it fits the exact number of players that you have. If you don't have that luxury, not every game has a strong focus on balance like that, on the encounter building. So if your game doesn't have that, or you just even don't trust yourself to be able to do it, maybe you're a newer GM, that's okay. Instead, what you can do is, instead of creating a GMPC, something with all this personality and baggage and possible chances to push their own agendas in the plot or whatever, you can just have an allied creature, a beast, right, that is befriended by the group, and instead of being controlled by a single character, the entire group controls it. If you do this, I recommend you give everyone, some sort of extra actions to do it, rather than having to eat into their own actions, and just treat it as this shared resource that they can all direct as need be, and that's going to encourage some fun teamwork. And because they're going to be rolling the dice for this creature, it's maybe it's an animal, maybe it's some sort of construct, whatever the case may be. It's not going to have enough personality there. It's going to have enough to be memorable. You want them to be attached to it, but it's never going to have its own agenda aside from helping them. And so they're going to roll the checks for it. They're going to feel like what it does is also what they did, right? They're going to feel connected to those actions rather than seeing the GM control something that goes up and crits the bad guy. In this case, you want to make sure that the pet is potent enough to help out in a fight, but not strong enough to outdo anyone. So generally speaking, maybe a point or two on proficiency behind, or on just the bonuses to rolls behind what everyone can do for the most part. But then feel free to have one or two things that they can do really well that the party just lacks another way to do. Another option, you could have the players join a guild or organization that will sort of temporarily pair up groups. And you can do this as sort of a revolving door of that third or fourth player, whatever it may be. It will only last an adventure or so, before getting split back up to, repair up teams, right? Now, one thing that's really cool about that is if you had one or more other players that just could not commit to a regular game, are really interested, really want to play, or just try it out, you've now got a wonderful in-game mechanic to introduce characters and have them go away if it doesn't work out, or if their schedule just is preventing them from playing regularly, but also bring them back if somebody does want to come back again. And then if somebody is able to start up and play long-term, they can either play this recurring character they've been, or they can, of course, start a new character, whatever the case may be. But it allows for a lot of versatility in terms of your party size and stuff like that, where, this week I'm controlling, this NPC, but next week, our friend from college is going to be in town and wants to play, so we'll have them set up and with their own character, and they can come in and roll with us without having to worry about where they fit in long term or anything like that, because you've got this perfect narrative device to have people drop in and out. Or you could always just resort to lackeys, two-dimensional characters that are lower level than the party and certainly less driven. They're going to provide aid in or out of combat, but they're not going to really be able to outdo anyone. Maybe even not in their specialty that, the party can't cover otherwise. They'll be sort of like, maybe they'll be an expert crafter or something like that if the party doesn't have one and needs one, or maybe they'll be good at identifying magic items and things like that. But for the most part, they're going to be worse than the party in pretty much every way that matters. But they're still going to be, extra bodies in a fight, whether it's just positioning them up on a hill using crossbows, hoping to at least soften up some enemies, things like that. Or, maybe get in trouble, and that could be interesting. But for the most part, they're not going to be the focal point of any combat or anything like that. They're just going to be there to help, and maybe you should have your players have to pay them, certain wages. Be sure if you're doing this, don't punish your players for just having a small group. No one can really help that. So make sure you're giving them enough extra gold that it's not going to fit into what they're expected to have money-wise to function within the game. Make sure that it's extra gold that they then have to give to these people. That way they're feeling this monetary cost, but it's not actually affecting their power. Because the fact is, you're only doing this because there's not enough of them. So don't also make them broke. Now let's talk bad reasons to have a GMPC. Maybe as a GM you feel like you need this important NPC to be there. Some GMs will insert someone or want someone to be vital to the plot absolutely cannot exist without them. And sometimes they will have power or import that's even greater than anybody in the party. That's a bad GMPC. Maybe the GMPC exists as like sort of plot or morale police, who is there to make sure that the party doesn't become a bunch of murder hobos or, do anything bad. The GM has decided this is going to be a heroic campaign, and if your rogue wants to steal, there's going to be some sort of paladin or champion shaking their fist and giving them glares about it, or maybe even, worst case scenario, attacking them over these actions. Obviously, we need alternatives there. So to GMs, if you think that a character needs to exist and be central to the plot of your campaign for everything to work out the way that you have it planned, it really should be a player character or just a recurring NPC and not a constantly present GMPC. If you can't do it without a GMPC, if you can't make your plot work without it, then there's a real problem, and you may want to shelf this idea until you can make it work with having this character, this important character, bow out after session 1 or whatever the case may be. Come back to that once you've figured out how to work around that problem. Ideally by making the players the important ones. But, I'm sure there are some brilliant campaigns that started with outside of the party sort of motivations and stuff like that, and I'm sure there are GMs that make it work. But just be very careful with it. If you feel that you need plot or fun police, as the case may be, then it's time to sit down with your group and address the difference in goals that you all have about the type of game you want to be running in. If you want a serious game and your players are, want something a little less heavy and more just sort of screwing around, neither of you are wrong. Both of those are great ways to play. But you're not seeing eye to eye on this campaign, and that means you may need to sit down, talk, adjust the expectations, and set boundaries. Try to work out a compromise. If you work out those boundaries and people are still exiting, pushing outside of those boundaries, nobody is going along with what you had planned, then you've got a much bigger problem than a GMPC. You have got a trust and communication breakdown, and you're going to need to go back to and do a session 0 again. If you have questions on a session 0, we've done a video about it, so click that link. It'll appear up somewhere, and check that out. It's something that's going to help. It's never going to hurt your game to have a session 0. It's almost certainly going to make it better for everybody. So have you used a GMPC or been in a game that had one? How did that go? Did it cause problems, or was it a great fit? What did the GM, or you, if you were the GM, what went right there? What went wrong? Would you do it again? Would you recommend it? Come down to the comments and let us know, or come hang out on Discord and talk about it. Thanks so much for watching, everybody. We really do appreciate it. Welcome to the collective, and we will see you next time. Bye.